ESBR Boxing, we are back. The dream team once again. Myself and my esteemed co-colleague, my esteemed cohort, my friend and buddy Gregory Doyle, and we are here to bring a bit of a bit of an offbeat video today. It's not a review, it's not a preview necessarily. What we're going to focus on is Laurence Okolie. The specific question being, will Laurence Okolie become a heavyweight world champion? We're not going to put a time limit on it, but what I'm going to do first and foremost, before I pass over to Greg and get his thoughts. Obviously, I've introduced him as a hardcore before. His knowledge dwarfs mine, unfortunately, as you know, Okolie would to someone like Carl Frampton. But we're going to go into it now and say, right, Greg, let me just give a little tail of the tape. So, Laurence Okolie, 30 years old, a record of 19-0, 14 KOs, height 6'5", and 82.5-inch reach. He's WBO World Cruiserweight Champion at the moment. Recently fighting David Light. That was the back end of March, which was I suppose after the contract issues he had sort of a year out of the ring essentially. So it's sort of a comeback fight for him. But other names he's got on there, I suppose that people will sort of know would be sort of Glowaki's obviously a big one. Camacho, other guys sort of around that nature. But I think obviously he needs. It's been said at cruiserweight he needs a unification fight essentially to kind of solidify himself in that division. Before he himself has said that he might move up to the heavyweight division. So, Greg, I've given a bit of a whistle-stop tour there. We're not going to talk about style necessarily at cruiserweight unless you want to bring it into potential reasons why he might succeed at heavyweight. First question first. I'm just going to ask you for an answer, then we'll unpick it. So, Greg, do you think, not putting a time limit when he's 30 years old now, that before Laurence Okolie calls it a day on boxing, were he to have a natural career that doesn't end via injury, etc., that he will at some point become a heavyweight world champion?
It's a really tough question, Elliot. First of all, just want to say thank you so much for having me, as always. Good buddy of mine. It's a really tough question because he's only 30 and a lot of heavyweights only come into their prime maybe 33, 34, some 35. So he's got time on his side as a heavyweight. 6'5" is a decent height for a heavyweight, but these guys seem to be getting bigger all the time. You've got Tyson Fury at 6'9". You've got Hrgovic, I think he's 6'7". You've got these guys, they're giants these days. I think it's possible for him to become heavyweight champion, yes, but I think it needs to be at the right time. I think your Furies and your Joshuas and your Usyks, they need to be out of the way. Wilder will obviously be out of the way as well. He's round about the same age. After that, it's possible. You have to be honest, Elliot, whether you think someone is really good or not, you have to look at 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And yeah, who's going to be there at that time? And he's going to have a lot more experience. So it's something that you have to be open to. So it's very possible.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think you obviously mentioned Hrgovic and sort of Jalilov there as two sort of monsters that seem to be sort of coming up in the heavyweight division. Just I've taken a little the current sort of top 10, Ring Magazine top 10, I've had a look through the kind of heights. And Okolie would slow, if he slots in at the moment, that'd obviously be Fury would be bigger than him, 6'9". Joshua 6'6", so roughly similar. Wilder 6'7". Zhang 6'6", so we'll call that roughly even as well. And then Joyce also 6'6". So the guys beneath him will be Dillian White 6'4", Usyk only 6'3". So yeah, I mean, obviously, and Andy Ruiz is 6'2". So I suppose height-wise, he slots kind of in the middle there. But I think out of those names that I've given you, were Okolie to cross over tomorrow, next month, whatever, where would you slot him? Do you reckon it's too premature to even put him in with a sort of top 10, or do you reckon he could kind of creep up the bottom of the top 10? Maybe would you back him maybe to fight someone against Dillian White, Andrew Ruiz, against those sort of names, or do you think it's premature to put him in with that company currently?
Well, the first interesting point, Elliot, before I answer your question, it's a very good question, one of the best I've had actually. In 2 or 3 years, though, all those guys are going to be gone. Every one of them. They're all 33 to 36, 37. They've got a couple of years left. So, however, the question being, if Laurence Okolie moved up now, guys like, well, it's difficult because I was going to say guys like Andy Ruiz, but I think Laurence Okolie's worst nightmare is a fighter who is really aggressive and punches hard. I think that's how you beat Laurence Okolie. Andy Ruiz can be that guy. He can be aggressive and he punches relatively hard. But sometimes when fighters lose to someone like Anthony Joshua, there's a blueprint there on how to beat them. If he joined the heavyweight ranks tomorrow, I'd have him in the top 20. I don't know if I would have him in the top 10 as yet. I think some guys, and you'll love to hear this, but I think if he fought Dillian White tomorrow, styles make fights. I think you could catch Dillian White and hurt him and stop him. But it's still a very risky fight, and it's one that, whatever way it went, wouldn't surprise me. Andy Ruiz, I think Andy Ruiz would have a hard time with Okolie just because of how awkward he is. But we've not really seen Laurence Okolie really tested on the whiskers yet. And that's why it's such a hard question to answer. But to answer it as fair as I can, Elliot, I think I would have him maybe top 20 at the moment. I think that's fair, because if you look at the top guys, like you said, top four, Usyk, Joshua, Wilder, Fury, no one's getting in there at the moment. Out with that, you've got guys who are, I mean, do you know who I think would be a nightmare at this stage for Laurence Okolie based on style and size? Pulev. I think Pulev could be a really hard night's work for him. Forget that Derek Chisora beat him. That was a really close fight. I think that could be a hard fight for him. So I think for me, Elliot, I think you've got to have him top 20 at the moment, just to keep yourself right and not overestimate his abilities.
No, well, you've mentioned there actually some very profound points about, especially one. I said at the outset of the video we might not talk about style, but frankly we are going to now talk about style. And actually, if you mentioned the styles make fights. And Laurence Okolie has been criticised, I think. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very effective, his style. It's maybe not eye-catching, I suppose, is what I would say. That kind of, jab hold. But he's got a high KO percentage, so obviously carries power. What I would say to you is, do you think, obviously he kind of tends to be bigger than the guys he fights at cruiserweight, taller at least, so with a bigger reach, so can kind of fight that way. As we've said, he already kind of slots into the middle of that kind of top 10 but obviously if you had, like you say, Hrgovic and Jalolov, he would slip further beneath that on height. Do you think his style is one that would translate necessarily to the heavyweight division if he chooses to fight the way he currently fights? Or do you think because obviously people might have longer reaches and him will be bigger than him, it's sort of an impossible way and have to essentially remodel his style?
Yeah, so Elliot, what I would say is what I'm about to say. I am not comparing Laurence Okolie to Lennox Lewis, but Laurence Okolie has got that kind of jab, weight, throw a massive right hand, the same way that Lennox Lewis he did fight. Let's be honest, I'm not saying their abilities are any way similar, but the heavyweight division has changed even since Lennox Lewis. That will be effective for people round about the same height, maybe an inch taller. Anyone bigger than that, I think you just need to look at now. I think that Lennox Lewis was a better fighter than Vitaly Klitschko, and I know it was the end of his career, but Lennox Lewis struggled with that style against a guy who was a couple of inches. I think Vitaly was about 6'8". He struggled to implement that, and when the fight was stopped, he did start to come into the fight more. But Laurence Okolie is very much at range. He'll jab, grab. Try grabbing Tyson Fury. Try grabbing Filip Hrgovic. It's not really going to end well, is it, if you try and really wrestle these guys the way he's throwing these cruiserweights about? So if his style's to be effective, I think if it's someone round about the same height, maybe even an inch, 2 inches taller, who isn't the most technically gifted, yes, it can work. Anything above that and it's an elite heavyweight, no, not for me.
I have another question, which is about, I suppose it's about the British interest. When you mentioned obviously some of the names, obviously you mentioned Usyk and then you mentioned Lennox Lewis, but other names I suppose that have crossed over. One Brit in here, but obviously one Usyk being Ukrainian and the other one being US. So Holyfield, Hay, and Usyk is currently the only former cruiserweight champions to win a world heavyweight title. So obviously, if Okolie were to do this, it would be a landmark achievement, frankly. And I mean, obviously, we've seen Holyfield unify divisions. Usyk as well is on his way there. If Fury ever decides to fight him, and obviously David Hay had a memorable evening, didn't he? When he won the world title, but then obviously a forgettable one when he hurt his toe against Vlad, or in the run up to Vlad. But I'm thinking, do you think? I know it's hard. It's obviously hard to kind of compare eras and different fighters. But Hay obviously was only 6'3", so a bit smaller than Okolie, and 78-inch reach, so noticeably shorter reach, like sort of nearly 5 inches in reach difference there. Having seen Hay equip himself against that generation and Okolie going to this one, do you think that actually that Laurence Okolie could be a more successful fighter overall up at heavyweight than David Hay, or is that far fetched?
No, I don't think he would be as good, because David Hay was a ferocious puncher, and he got himself into range. David Hay, for me in this country, is one of the most underrated fighters ever, because people look at the end of his career with all these injuries, with Tony Bellew. People don't remember the David Hay that won the European title in 60 seconds. The guy that knocked out a very good world champion in Enzo Maccarinelli in 2-3 rounds. Stepped up to heavyweight. John Reeves was a handful for anyone. Disposed of him, systematically broke him down. Beat Nikolai Valoev, a guy who was 7'2". And that's the next point I'm going to come to, Elliot, because...
Rocked him as well, rocked him.
Yes. Evander Holyfield was robbed against Nikolai Valoev, but Laurence Okolie isn't the elusive stylist that these guys are. David Hay rolled, and he got himself into range for shots, and he unleashed. Evander Holyfield was always on his toes, knew how to be in and out of distance. Laurence Okolie's not that fighter. He's very upright, and he waits for the opportunities. He can't do that heavyweight. If you're going to fight guys that are bigger than you, you need to be able to move around the ring, show that you can be strategic, I should say. I don't think he can do that. I don't. So, yeah, it's not for me. I think David Hay and Evander Holyfield, and even Alexander Usyk, I think they're a different breed from Laurence Okolie.
Let me we're gonna diverge a bit here, Greg, because the last question is going to sort of focus on more of a sort of matchmaking question. But before I do, I want to kind of ask you, I suppose, whether you before we go into that one, whether you essentially feel that what I'm thinking. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth. What I'm thinking is that you might be thinking that Okolie would have a better chance to wait essentially for this current generation to go further out the hill or just disappear entirely. That's obviously the top four. Maybe wait till he's 34, 35. You should be 40 plus at that point. And then contest the other guys, the guys you've already kind of mentioned, really. So Hrgovic, I suppose, Anderson, throw that into their names, Jalalov, those sort of guys. He would have a better chance potentially of winning heavyweight if the kind of belt's fragmented, whatever, and he kind of got up there at that stage. Firstly, is that true? Do you believe that would be the case? And then, depending on your answer, I'll ask the final question, which is where I ask you to step into well, not Eddie Hearn's shoes anymore, into Ben Shalom's shoes.
Yeah, so is the question that try to catch that there, is it basically if they let go of the titles and they retired, could I see him winning one? Do
you think he's got a better chance against, I suppose, tomorrow's generation? So, the Hrgovic's, the Jalalovs, Jared Andersons, the heavyweights kind of coming through as opposed to current heavyweights. So, like, as in, would it suit him best to kind of wait 5 years, say, not move up to heavyweight and then move up to heavyweight and try and essentially capture a fragmented belt if Usyk and Fury retire?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You always ask me the best questions, the ones that I can't really... it would be so nice just to give a straight answer, but I'm like, yes, I think it would. If I'm Ben Shalom, I'm telling Laurence Okolie, 2 years, inside 2 years, then move up to heavyweight. Move up when you're 32, coming up for 33. I think he's got a better chance against the new generation. I think guys like Jared Anderson are very good, but they're not Alexander Usyk. They're not Tyson Fury. They're very good. Jalalov is very good as well, but this guy can't make up his mind whether he wants to attack the professional heavyweight division or if he wants to go back down and fight for the world amateur title. The guy needs to make his mind up. So yeah, I think if he waits a year or two early, I think he's got a better chance for some of these guys coming through, because they're not the same at the moment. If you look at some of the heavyweight breeds, they've got generations that have greats. You had Lewis, you had Tyson, you had Holyfield. It went quiet. Vlad didn't look like that guy who was going to step into those shoes. In time, he did. And Vitaly was always very good. It was then a bit shifty for a while. Joshua came along, done very good. Tyson Fury came along, done very good. But there is a year or two, sometimes 3 years gap where guys like Sultan Ibragimov, they win world heavyweight titles, and you're like, who are you and where did you come from? I mean that with the greatest respect. But yeah, I think if he waits a year or two, I think he's got a good chance of winning a title more, if I'm being honest.
Now, Greg, this is going to be a tough question because obviously the landscape will potentially shift. So, I mean, we're not going to judge you too harshly on which way you go with this one, frankly, because it's going to be difficult. The question itself is quite challenging, but B, amongst the shifting context, could be even harder. I want to put yourself in Ben Shalom's shoes and say, Laurence Okolie's turned over at a time of your choosing. How would you match him maybe 2-3 fights at heavyweight and then into a sort of championship fight. How would you step him up if you had the opportunity?
One of the first fights I would look at is I would see where Andy Ruiz is. I would see what kind of fights he's had the next 2 years if he's still kicking about, because I think Deontay Wilder might beat him. I always thought Andy Ruiz would be a nightmare for Deontay Wilder. Now, after seeing Ortiz hurting him, I'm not so sure. Another fight for Laurence Okolie, I would throw him in with Luis Ortiz. You've got a few gatekeepers about, Elliot, that would be really interesting fights. Guys like Jerry Forrest, who are kicking about, guys who are going to, test you before you go for world titles. I would maybe match him with the Jerry Forrests at first. Then I would look at Luis Ortiz. Then I would look at maybe Andy Ruiz. And then after that, it's got to be an acid test. It's got to be someone who was basically on the verge of winning a world heavyweight title, or had won and lost it. I think Dillian Whyte will be gone by the time if he fights those fighters. So for me, before you go for the world title, I think it's got to be someone like Jared Anderson. I think it's got to be. And then after that, who's world champion at that time? Very difficult to say. Don't be surprised if Joshua gets his belts back, because Joshua's a little bit younger than Usyk and Fury. Not much, but he is a bit. So yeah, it's a really difficult one. You've got Jermaine Franklin up there as well, but yeah, that wouldn't be a bad fight. Before the world title, let's forget Jared Anderson for a minute. Let's say Jermaine Franklin. If you beat those guys, Jermaine Franklin was robbed. A lot of people think. I think it was a very close fight. Beat Dillian Whyte. Anthony Joshua, he went the distance and didn't look bothered most times. I think that's the acid test before the world title, if I'm being honest.
No, I think, Gregory, look, as usual, I don't want to put my name into the hat here because the knowledge will be dwarfed. But I think from what you're saying, I would have to agree with essentially. I think Laurence Okolie could. I think he's got the tools, he's got the physique, potentially, he's got the power essentially that I think will translate. But like you also say,
he'll fill out as well, Elliot. He'll fill out, he'll get bigger.
There'll need to be, I think, some style changes. Like you say, you're not going to be jabbing guys who are 6'9" and sort of standing there and holding them. This is not going to happen. So there'll be some learning along the way. But I think if the timing is right, I actually think Laurence Okolie could become world heavyweight champion, which, I've sat through Okolie fights many times, and to even say that sentence out loud brings a certain amount of shame. But I still think it's a possibility. But we will see. But Gregory, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your expertise. And thank you very much, obviously, all you guys for watching. Greg, is there any last minute comment you'd like to say to anyone watching? Or are you happy
thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it. Love doing these videos with you, Elliot. Very intelligent man. So thank you very much for having me as always.
Thank you very much, Gregory. And like I said, thank you guys for watching. Last point, actually, if you think, put your comments down below. Do you agree with Greg? Do you agree with me? Me and Greg do agree. So if you do, you agree with both of us. But if you disagree with us, let us know. Let us know why. Or alternatively, who you'd match Okolie with, when you think he should cross over. All those sort of comments and questions. But yeah, we'll check on, I suppose, with the career of Laurence Okolie and upcoming content that we have with various interviews and fight previews and reviews. But until then, guys, thank you very much for watching.